177 horsepower. In 1975, the most powerful tractor built in Britain was not made by a household name. It was made by a small firm in Manchester that most farmers today have never heard of, and it could drag a loaded plow through clay that would stop anything else on the farm. The 1970s were the decade when British agriculture went big. Farms consolidated, fields grew, and the demand for pulling power exploded. Britain joined the European Economic Community in 1973, and the guaranteed prices that followed pushed farmers to expand, drain, and plow land that had never been worked at scale. The demand was for tractors that could pull bigger implements, faster, through heavier ground. The American manufacturers saw the same trend and answered with machines of enormous scale. The British industry answered with machines that were heavier, stronger, and more powerful than anything the country had built before, built by firms with engineering identities as distinct as their paint schemes. Some were giants of volume, building thousands of units a year for farms across Britain and the Commonwealth. Others were converters and specialists, firms that took existing machines and made them stronger, and the strongest of them all came from the most unexpected direction, from a firm that had started life building locomotives and ended it building the most powerful tractor Britain would ever produce. 5 tractors, 5 different approaches to power, and only one was the strongest. Let us count them down. Number 5, the David Brown 1412, Huddersfield, 1976. The 1412 was the biggest tractor David Brown ever put into series production, powered by a 79 horsepower Perkins 6-cylinder diesel. That number sounds modest today, but the 1412 weighed over 3 tons and delivered its power through a 12 forward-speed gearbox that let the driver hold exactly the right speed for every implement. David Brown was the company that had owned Aston Martin, and the engineering culture showed. The transmission was built like a racing gearbox, the hydraulics were precise, and the cab, optional at first, was one of the quietest of the era. The 1412 could pull a 4-furrow plow through heavy Yorkshire clay all day at a steady engine speed, and it did. The 1412 also introduced the auto-drive improvement, a system that let the driver shift up and down the 12-speed box without clutching through every step, an early answer to the power shift transmissions arriving from America. On the rolling hills of the Yorkshire heartland and the flatlands of East Anglia, the 1412 became the contractor machine, the tractor you hired when the work was too heavy for the family fleet. The 6-cylinder Perkins was the same engine family that powered lorries and plant across Britain, which meant the 1412 sounded like industry and lasted like it. David Brown also offered the Selectomatic hydraulic control, which let the driver manage implement depth from the seat with a single lever, technology the company had pioneered through the 1960s and refined to a fine art by the middle 1970s. Owners described the same qualities decades later. The engine starts on cold mornings without complaint. The hydraulics still lift what they lifted when new, and the cab, noisy by modern standards, was a palace in 1976. Production lasted until 1980, when Case International absorbed the David Brown name, and surviving examples are still working small farms today, 40 years on, with their original gearboxes still shifting cleanly. Number 4, the Nuffield 460 with the BMC engine, Birmingham, 1968 to 1969. The Nuffield name carried the weight of Lord Nuffield himself, the man who founded Morris Motors and gave British agriculture the universal. The 460 was the flagship, powered by a BMC 4.98-liter 4-cylinder diesel, producing 62 horsepower at the rated speed. What made the 460 powerful was not the headline number but the torque. The BMC engine delivered its pulling power low in the rev range, exactly where a tractor needs it, and the 460 gained a reputation as the machine that never stalled. It would pull a loaded trailer up a wet hill at tickover speeds that would bog down rivals. The cab was minimal, the controls were heavy, and the driving position was upright and exposed, but the engine was agricultural royalty. BMC engines powered trucks, generators, boats, and tractors across the Commonwealth, and parts were available in every market town. The 460 also carried the famous Nuffield paint scheme, lilac and poppy orange on some export markets, and the more familiar livery at home, and the shape, square and upright with the rounded grille, looked like what it was, a working machine built without vanity. The hydraulics were British-built, the electrics were simple enough to repair in a field, and the whole tractor could be rebuilt with hand tools. Farmers who ran them remember starting the BMC diesel on cold mornings with the decompression lever and a strong arm, and they remember the engine settling into an idle that promised it would pull all day. The 460 was also the machine that proved the British diesel had come of age, A decade earlier, petrol and vaporizing oil engines had still been common on British farms, and by the arrival of the 460 the diesel was universal, the BMC unit being one of the engines that made the change irreversible. Production was brief because the Nuffield name was folded into Leyland in 1969, but the 460 established the template for the big British diesel tractor, and its engine architecture lived on inside the Leyland range for another decade. Number 3. The Leyland 270, Bathgate and Leyland, 1970 to 1975. The 270 was the first big tractor of the Leyland era, carrying a 91 horsepower six-cylinder engine derived from the BMC design. The merger of BMC and Leyland created a tractor division with the resources to compete, and the 270 was the statement. It was one of the first British tractors with a genuine safety cab, as standard thinking, synchromesh gears, and live power takeoff. The six-cylinder engine was smooth for its day, and the torque rise through the working range let the 270 keep pulling when the soil hardened. Exported across the world, from Australia to Africa, the 270 carried the British tractor industry into the 1970s. The odd styling, with the rounded grille and the flat deck, divided opinion then and divides collectors now. The 270 also benefited from Bathgate, the Scottish factory that built tractors with a quality reputation the English plants sometimes lacked, and the combination of the smooth six and the solid Scottish assembly gave the model its following. In the export markets, the 270 carried the Union Jack into territories where British cars had already retreated, and the dealership networks in Australia and New Zealand kept parts flowing for decades. At home, the 270 was the arable man choice for big acreage, before the American imports took over the segment. It was also one of the first British tractors to be offered with a genuine flat floor and proper access, and the driving position, with the wheel set high and the controls falling naturally to hand, was praised by the farming press of the day. Leyland sold the 270 alongside the smaller 253 and 262, and the range covered British farming from the small holding to the 1,000-acre estate, the fullest line the merged company ever offered. Production ended in 1975 with around 3,000 units built, and the 270 has become one of the most collectible British tractors of the decade, precisely because it was the peak of the Leyland line, the last time a British-owned volume tractor maker built a flagship this big. Number 2. The Roadless 110, Addlestone, 1972 to 1976. Roadless did not build tractors, Roadless converted them. The firm took stock machines and fitted their own four-wheel drive systems, creating tractors that could transmit power through all four wheels instead of two. The 1110 was their flagship, based on the Ford 7000 but transformed by the Roadless drive. The Ford engine produced 91 horsepower, but with four-driven wheels the effective pulling power in the field rivaled machines with far bigger engines. A two-wheel drive tractor wastes power through wheel slip. The Roadless 110 slipped almost nothing, and on wet ground the difference was dramatic. Where a conventional tractor spun and dug itself in, the 110 walked away with the load. Roadless built only around 200 examples of the 110, each one essentially hand-finished, and today they are the holy grail of British tractor collectors. The Roadless system used a spiral bevel drive at the front axle, engineered in-house at Addlestone, and the build quality was higher than the factories the base tractors came from. Roadless had been converting tractors since the 1920s, and by the 1970s, the name carried the same weight in farming circles as the converters of Rolls-Royce did in motoring. A Roadless cost significantly more than the stock machine, and buyers paid it because the conversion paid for itself in working days. Where a two-wheel drive tractor lost a day to a wet field, the Roadless worked. The 110 in its red livery with the distinctive hub design is instantly recognizable at any tractor show, and the crowd always gathers around it. The conversion philosophy that Roadless perfected, taking a good machine and making it unstoppable, was engineering at its most practical, and it deserves its place high on this list. Number 1. The Muir-Hill 171, Manchester, 1975 to 1984. The biggest, heaviest, most powerful tractor Britain ever built. The Perkins 8-cylinder engine produced 177 horsepower, fed through an Eaton 12-speed power-shift transmission, and the whole machine weighed over 8 tons. The Muir-Hill was not really a farm tractor. It was an industrial pulling machine, built for land drainage, reclamation, and heavy haulage, with a massive square-section chassis and 4 equal-sized wheels driven through every gear. It could pull a mole plow through subsoil that would stop a dozer, and contractors bought it precisely for the work no other machine could do. Muir-Hill started as a builder of railway locomotives before the war, and the engineering scale showed. Inside the cab, the 171 felt like a piece of mining plant rather than agriculture. The company was absorbed and the model faded by 1984, but a number of examples survive, and a few are still in commercial use, still pulling loads that modern tractors approach with caution. The 171 stands alone as the most powerful tractor Britain ever produced. Its significance went beyond the horsepower figure. The Perkins V8 at its heart was a British engine, designed and built in Peterborough, and the decision to fit it to a tractor chassis of this scale was a statement that Britain could still build the biggest iron in agriculture. Contractors remember the 171 for land drainage work, pulling mole plows through wet subsoil for mile after mile, and for the noise, a V8 rumble that carried across entire farms. The Eaton power shift meant the driver could hold traction through changing ground without stopping, which was the entire point of the machine. Muir-Hill also offered the 171 with industrial equipment, loaders and winches, and the same chassis worked in quarrying and forestry. It was the last of a type. When production ended in 1984, no British firm ever again built a tractor of that scale, and the 171 became full stop at the end of the British heavy tractor story. We started with the David Brown 1412, 79 horsepower from the Aston Martin connection. Then the Nuffield 460, 62 horsepower, with the torque of royalty. Next, the Leyland 270, 91 horsepower carrying the merged industry. Then the Roadless 110, 91 horsepower through all four wheels. And finally, the Muir-Hill 171, 177 horsepower, the biggest tractor Britain ever built. The pattern in this list is ambition against the clock. British tractor builders were competing not just with each other, but with the American giants, and they answered with engineering that was individual, clever, and often hand-built in small numbers. The 1970s were the last decade when Britain built its own big tractors, and every machine on this list came from that final push. When the industry consolidated into international groups, the names disappeared, but the machines stayed in the fields. Some are still there, 40 and 50 years on, still pulling, which is the strongest argument any tractor can make. And there is a lesson in this list for anyone who builds anything. Every machine here came from a company that understood one thing completely, whether it was gearboxes at Huddersfield, engines at Birmingham, or four-wheel drive at Addlestone. None of them tried to do everything. Each did one thing at a level the world noticed, and the tractors they built are remembered for exactly that. The names on the factories have gone, but the machines carry the names forward, and every working example at a show or in a field is a piece of British engineering history still doing its job. Which of these 5 machines would you want on your land? 1412, 460, 270, 110, or 171? Write just the name in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey through British pulling power, leave a like and subscribe, and tell us what you want us to take apart next. British trucks, British engines, British motorcycles, or something else entirely.